Professor Mackey, class, how's it going? It's Alex here, and we're going to jump into three communication theories and talk about them. And I've got some questions on the handout that we'll discuss. Um, but I have three theories, communication theories, that I think they all intertwine in a thesis or an argument that we'll kind of frame out in this conversation. And it's basically the postmodern social media medium that we live in these days. And so I chose three. I narrowed down three out of the 10 we originally started with because I feel these all kind of went with each other, and I could present an argument and a enlightened conversation about it, and in effect to hopefully make us more aware of the way we are on social media and to perhaps improve and help others improve on social media. So let's frame this out. We exist in a postmodern period. There will always be a postmodern theory. In 1800, there was probably a postmodern theory of communication. It just wasn't so clearly defined as it is now. There was modernism, and that's where we get used to the language, the relationships, and the motivations and the boundaries that exist inside of that bubble of the way we communicate. And now, over the last 10 years, 20 years, social media has came around, and a lot can change in a very short amount of time now with social media. All of the world's information is gratefully at our fingertips. We can figure out anything, talk to anyone, and do pretty much whatever we want to do with that information. But it's a different thing. Before President Trump got elected, Twitter really didn't have anything to do with foreign policy, and now people look to Twitter as an outlet of political inputs, outputs, and foreign policy can be dictated a lot from Twitter, which is an interesting thing because it's a new medium, and there's a lot of people that downtrot the idea of postmodernism, obviously because it's new and different, and that's always how it's been. And so I found a journal article, one of the research pieces that I have, and it's from 1994, but they're writing about something that was even before that. And it just goes to show you that the negative connotation of postmodernism isn't always so bad. And so the quote goes, is it time to make a mummy out of the postmoderns? Should we buy Fukuyama's End of History? That's a philosopher's book on the end times. Not I. Was the postmodern movement a fiction of our collective imagination? Not to me. The gravediggers are assembled here to bury postmodern philosophies. Yet I do remember leading marches and vigils against the wars of the empire and getting erected and handcuffed and legs shackled by the university police. Resistance to nihilism is still active. More people are joining the vigils, despite the theoretical nihilism of the cacophony of postmodernism. And says, despite what Latour calls the hyper-incommensurability, there's a burgeoning worldwide resistance to the empire. Yeah, sure. This is exactly where we are now. We see a pushback on, all types of things, social issues, societal issues, economic issues, and political issues, all via the postmodern framework that we're in. And I just wanted to, really highlight that a lot of communication occurs over social media, and that brings me to the next theory that we have, and it's the third person effect. And this, to me, I didn't honestly know what this was at first. I mean, I knew what it was, but it was never really defined to me truly. And I thought this was fascinating, and I just want to define what third person effect is with this journal article that I found with a lot of my research. And it says the well-documented third person effect empirically describes an important insight about how people relate to mass media and their neighbors. Individuals, the first person, tend to believe that they themselves are independent-minded and resilient to the effects of mass media. So they are absolved from the effects of mass media. However, these same independently minded audience members view mass media as quite influential on the beliefs of others, the third person actors. As a result, people tend to believe mass media appeals designed to persuade are quite a bit more persuasive than they actually are. So they're not observing so the individual is not observing how impactful it is on them, and they want to verbally share it. But in this postmodern framework that we're working in this argument, to me, it reminds me of my dad and how he always is sharing Now This Politics. It's a page on Facebook that shares only leftist or liberal political opinions, and I love it. I'm not opposed to any political view. I will sit down with a person on the left, a liberal feminist, and have elegant, respectful conversation, and I'll sit down with someone on the far right, conservative NRA member, and have intelligent, intellectual discussions, and just observe all the ideas and appreciate all the ideas. But we can still, find our own political ideologies and go forth. But people share memes all the time, and that's where I'm getting at with this. The third person effect to me can be seen through meme culture and how people share memes, especially, people in their 60s and 50s. They don't really take the time. No one does anymore, apparently, on Facebook. They just start blogs or podcasts. No one forms a well-formed opinion and wants to conversate anymore on Facebook. It's just meme sharing. And there's no real benefit to that. And people are abrasive, and it's ugly. And I remember in the 2016 election when it was Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump, it was the great meme wars of 2016. And I remember people were utilizing memes to communicate, and people were getting offended and being unfriended. And I observed this with my father, and he just gets wrapped around the fence, with this. It's just bad. And I think there's a way to resolve this. We're not relegated. It's important to remember that we're not relegated to the 160 characters of Twitter, or we're not relegated to our opinions just being the click share button. And so how can we have a renaissance of intellectuals and conversation via Facebook and through these mediums, as opposed to just getting off and self-isolating from Facebook and the malignant opinions and malignant vibes people get from Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. And what is it? It's observing narrative theory. And the narrative theory, it goes back as long as time can dictate, all the way back to the public arena with Plato and all these other awesome philosophers. And it's really, they frame the narrative theory around, like, there's the 5 points, and they talk about actors and storyline and dialogue and all this stuff. And that's really what we need to get back to, is an empathetic, thought out, two-way conversation. Because with the third person effect and meme sharing, people don't communicate like that. People have long conversations. So I found a great quote, and it was through my research, and it said, in ancient Athens, how a philosopher handled himself or herself in the public arena was a matter of concern to him or her, since how others viewed his or her behavior was a means to judge his character. Both Dionysius and Plato's were well aware of this public display of oneself, and in the case of Dionysius, he used this confrontational style to his advantage to win over the likes of Alexander the Great and his father, King Philip III. In the case of Plato, however, we find that even the wisest among us can become conflicted and succumb to dissembling when our philosophical theories meet harsh reality, as was the case in Syracuse when Plato engaged the tyrants of Dionysius 1 and 2. It is to these issues that, as lesser known, the philosophers confront the problems, while the philosopher Plato and win the discussion. And so this sheds light on how early beginnings of philosophy were shown in the aftermath of Socrates' death. Individuals faced challenges to their reputations and even their lives when they lost or gained favor of powerful men and women. I try to degender that quote. It's hard to, because things were different back in the day. But so that just goes a lot about our credibility as human beings. People behave on social media completely differently than they would in real life, and if they were in a public arena. Could you imagine people discussing the COVID-19 response in a public forum, and with all their friends and family watching, and then they just, they would do the same third person effect communication style in a marble arena and just spamming one way. It wouldn't work. It would not work in a public arena. And I feel like people have lost the empathetic touch and the intellectual drive to have these conversations that help society stay healthy as as an organism, we need to talk about these things and work through them together. And social media, I feel like largely isn't helping. So how can we do this better? Maybe tone down the emotions on Facebook. Maybe tone down it and, hey, say, even though we have different opinions, you're still my friend, or I respect you, etc. So we're at 10 minutes already. Wow. I could spend a lot more time discussing this, and it would be very cool to do in person. But we'll jump into the questions. When was the last time you had an argument on social media that led to an unfriending? For me, probably 2016. People, they get mad, and I've since reclaimed those relationships and apologized. But people get heated, man, and it is one of those things. What age group do you see widely affected by this phenomenon? And for me, it's largely the senior citizen population, or people they've seemed to forgot that your computer has a keyboard, or you can call people on your phone and talk about things or create well-formed opinions and share them on the internet. They just think that Facebook is the only outlet for communication and Twitter is the only outlet for communication, but that is not so. Number 3, what are the best things about postmodern communication? I think the best things are also the worst things. How rapidly we can communicate ideas and how rapidly we can joke and observe an idea with a meme. That's pretty cool. But sometimes these emotions are centered around very important things that we shouldn't joke about and that we should form well-formed opinions about and communicate accurately with more a narrative theory of things. Even if the narrative theory takes a little bit more of a hyperbolic angle, it's worth it. And another cool thing about postmodern communication is podcasts. Podcasts, I feel like, are the answer they're the antidote to this short-winded 160 character social media post. And the reason I say is because you can find a podcast about anything. You could even start your own podcast. You can be your own echo chamber or whatever. Everyone deserves to have a voice, and I feel like that's what podcast does. And you can listen to people, very important people, talk about things at depth because they're not relegated to this 1 minute and 90-second clip on NBC or with Conan O'Brien or with some journalist reporter. They're not relegated to a 30-second to 90-second clip. They have this hours long. As long as you want to listen, they'll talk it's that kind of thing. Generally, they're a couple hours though. And so the next question: do you think podcasts are a relevant solution to the postmodern qualm they're in? I pretty much just answered that. I would argue yes to that one. And do you think the media has done a good job covering COVID-19? This is where I really wish we could have an open discussion about the communication theories and what we've seen in priming and all of these things that I've observed. And I would say maybe they've done a good job. Maybe I'm sure they've tried their best. But my biggest critique is there's a lot of different data sets floating around, and no one, it seems like, knows what's going on. And maybe they could have. It seemed like at some points the media has been fear-mongering a tad bit. Like NBC, the nightly news always has a very, very different tone and a very almost borderline apocalyptic end days type tone. But if we were watching from New York City in the heat of the pandemic, perhaps it would make more sense. But since we've been relatively unscathed by this pandemic, I think we need to understand that other people are viewing this national level broadcast, and it might be a little bit more intense and fearful in other areas, perhaps even in Tampa or Orlando or Miami. But yeah, those are my 3 theories. And thank you all for watching, and have a good day. And you can email me if you have any questions. Have a good day.